Hi, this is Steve Vanderbilt for RegimeChange.org. Originally wasn't going to do a video tonight, but something popped up that almost got under the radar screen, and we want to talk about it. It's called the Council of Governors. Late in the afternoon on Friday, President Obama seated his 10 candidates, or his 10 governors, on his council. That's the council he created by executive order in January. If you remember the talk we had about that a week or so ago, that is the Council of Governors that report when the Secretary of Defense, Homeland Security, so on and so forth, calls them up to talk about how to use National Guard troops in conjunction with U.S. forces, that's active duty forces, inside the continental United States. Now, that's direct violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, but as we know, the Posse Comitatus Act has been watered down by other secondary legislation. See, this is something we've not really agreed to, and we haven't agreed to this fact. And it's an interesting point here. Now, this is being sold as something that helps Homeland Security and something that helps in the response in the events of a natural emergency. In other words, like Katrina or floods or so on and so forth. But what I find really interesting is FEMA is nowhere on this list of agencies that are going to be part of this conversation group with the Council of Governors. And that's very striking. What's even more striking is actually the people that Obama picked. And if you haven't seen it in the newspaper, and it's not really been reported there, and it's not really been reported in the mainstream media much at all, here's the list. It's Mike Rounds from South Dakota. He's a Republican. You got Jan Brewer, a Republican from Arizona. You got Jim Douglas, a Republican from Vermont. Louis Fortano, a Republican from Puerto Rico. Chris Gwyn... I can never pronounce her last name. Chris Greger, Democrat from Washington. Brad Henry, Democrat from Oklahoma. Robert McDonnell, a Republican from Virginia. Jeremiah or Jay Nixon, Democrat, Missouri. Martin O'Malley, Democrat, Maryland. And Bev Perdue, Democrat, North Carolina. Now, it's really interesting here, out of Mr. Obama's picks, on the Republican side, you have Mike Rounds, who's up for election, and he's the governor of South Dakota. He's up for election in 2010. You have Jan Brewer, who's up for election in 2010 in Arizona, because she was Secretary of State that moved up to governor as Ms. Napolitano moved up to the federal government. You have Jim Douglas, a Republican, who said, I'm not going to run for re-election in 2010. I'm done with politics. Then you have Louis Fortunato, who many people have been picking as a possible contender for the Republicans to run in 2012 against the Democrats. Okay, 5 seats, 4 up for re-election or not running, and the 5th, a potential adversary in 2012. Interesting. Now, it's even more interesting when you look at the Democrat side of the equation. You have Chris Greger in Washington, who had a massive amount of controversy for her election fundraising, where the statement of 2 Seattle newspapers said that over half her funds came from out of state for her budget. For her campaign funds for her re-election. You have Brad Henry in Oklahoma, who is pretty much regarded as being a centrist. He's pretty much a not making any ripples on the water type of guy. We regard him as a yes man. Now you've got Jay Nixon. He's famous. He's a Democrat in Missouri, famous for the flub on the MIAC report. And how he looks at us whacked out people in the middle, people like myself who served in the military, who owns firearms and mentions one dirty word: the Constitution. Yeah, we're terrorists, according to Mr. Nixon, and the MIAC report. Now, then you're looking at Martin O'Malley, who's surrounded by a lot of controversy from 2001 through 2006 through a series of scandalous events, kind of like old dirty politics, almost Chicago style. Wikipedia him and read about him. It's pretty interesting. Then last but not least, you got Bev Perdue in North Carolina. And Bev Perdue is pretty much a hardline, party line Democrat. If the Democratic, Central Caucus believes a certain way, that's her talking point. So we're going to mark her as a yes woman. Now, the one other person here that we talked about from the Republican side, on the Republican side here was Robert McDonald. He's pretty much regarded as a hawk. He's something we're a little concerned about. Keep in mind that the Council of Governors is pretty much at the beck and call of Obama. And when you couple the Council of Governors with Presidential Directive 51, signed by Mr. Bush in the previous administration, it is quite possible that Mr. Obama could use the Council of Governors and Directive Signing Order 51 to declare martial law in the event of something occurring. Now the question is, what would that be? Well, from looking over the documents, it's basically at his discretion. He could use a Katrina-style event, massive unemployment, financial unrest, even something we've been advocating here, trying to seize the banks by taking money out of the bank accounts. He could trip that and say martial law because there's been a definite threat to the economy, which is bullshit. Okay? We need to be very concerned about what the federal government is doing. And the Democrats are known to be big government. We really believe this presidential signing order naming the Council of Governors is unconstitutional. That it subverts other departments in the federal government already, namely FEMA. It's unnecessary and it's potentially dangerous. And we here at RegimeChange.org are not necessarily conspiracy theorists. We prefer to deal in facts, and those are facts that we check. But we're going to keep our eyes on the Council of Governors because it does not make any rational nor logical sense why it's being seated. And after looking at who's on the council, it only raises more questions. Is this an action of politics or power grab? It has to be one or the other. But for today, I'm Steve Vanderbilt for RegimeChange.org. Thank you. Good night.